Welcome to the Introduction to Unreal Engine. In this video, we'll learn to start the project launcher, take a look at the templates that are available, create a third-person game using the third-person template, do a walkthrough of the Unreal Editor, learn how to navigate in a scene, learn how to move things around, scale things, rotate things. We'll learn what building lighting means, and then we'll learn how to play the game in the editor. To get started, you'll start the Epic Games Launcher. The Epic Games Launcher is used for many purposes, including buying Epic Games and launching Epic Games. For our purposes, we're going to be in the library section, and from there you will see there are tabs across the top for the Unreal Engine content, learning Unreal Engine content, the marketplace, which we'll get into in a later video, and the library. And we want to be in the library section. You should have an installed version of Unreal Engine. For this video, we'll be using version 4.21.1. If you have previous projects, they'll appear below the engine versions, and below that is your vault, which will contain all of the content that you may have purchased or received for free from the Unreal Marketplace. For now, we'll just launch the Unreal Engine 4.21.1 by pressing the Launch button. The project browser will start up, and depending on the speed of your machine, it may take some time. Once the Unreal Project browser starts up, you'll observe there are two tabs, the Projects tab and the New Projects tab. The Projects tab contains all of your previous work. Let's click on the New Project tab and look at the options available there. There's two ways to program the Unreal Engine. One is using the blueprint templates, and the blueprint templates purport to require no programming knowledge. That's actually not entirely accurate. There's a lot of programming that goes on with the blueprint template. The only difference is that you are dragging and dropping blueprint nodes and connecting them as opposed to typing code. And speaking of typing code, there are also C++ templates. If you have the Visual Studio 2017 installed, you can write code in C++ and have it work in your game. For the purposes of this course, we'll be doing blueprints only. There are several blueprint templates available to you. The first person template is a very popular one. It features a player with a space gun that launches some large, almost tennis ball looking projectiles. Actually, they're probably closer to being basketball sized. There's a flying template and additional templates, including the rolling ball template, which we'll use later in the course. For now, what I'd like you to do is find the third person template. This template's very useful for making games that are walk-through adventure type games, or games where you will have a character where you want to see the whole character as opposed to just seeing the character's arms out in front of you. So in the third person template, we'll select desktop console. If it's not already selected, we'll stay with maximum quality, and we will include the starter content that comes with Unreal Engine. That adds a number of materials and objects for you to work with. The folder that you select for your projects is where all of your projects go, and all of the source files go, and it creates a separate folder within that folder for your project to live in. So let's change the name of that from My Project to My Third Person Project, and press the Create Project button. There will be a bit of a delay as the project's created and the files are set up for you, and then the Unreal Editor will start. I'm going to pause the video. When the Unreal Editor starts up, the third person example map will be loaded. We'll go over where things are stored and why this is called the third person example map. There's two tabs open on my editor. The second tab is the project settings. I'm going to close that for now. We're not going to get too far into that. So let's do a quick walkthrough of the editor and point out where things are and what goes with what and what all of these windows do and all of these controls. It can be quite overwhelming at first when you start the editor because there's so much crammed in to a very small amount of real estate. So first and foremost is your level editor, and that's this area right here. Now the level editor is an area that you edit your level, where you add content and move things around, and where you ultimately test play your game. So that's this area right here, and there are several options available in that editor, in the level editor, and we'll get into these later, but for now just leave them set at the values they were set to when you started the editor, i.e. their default values. Next most important in the list of windows that are open for you is the content browser. The content browser is where you find all of the materials that go, all of the materials and files that belong to your game. One change I like to make right off is to show the sources panel. So that's this option over here, and if you left click that, you'll see the content folder and then all of the sources that go with it. And I like to have that open so I'm not just navigating around the file system. You can put your mouse over the splitter and resize that if you like, and I do like to make that a bit smaller on the left side, the folder, so that I can see more content over here. The content folder, incidentally, is found in the project folder on your file system, and that project folder is the one that you specified when you created the project. Just to give a quick overview of the things that come in with the template, the third-person blueprint folder, if we toggle that open, has some blueprints inside of it, and we'll get to that later. This is the third-person character blueprint, and that's this little character that you see over here. And this is the third-person game mode, the game mode for the game. And again, these are some details that we'll cover later. The third-person folder has the meshes that are available to you to add content, and this is the third-person meshes that you see in this level. Here's the staircase, the area over here, and over here. And again, we'll talk about how to move stuff around later. Additional information, additional content that is at the top level are some lights and other things that you can add, and some materials that you can work with. In the starter content folder, there's a number of items available to you. Now notice when I clicked on that, this window popped up that said compiling shaders. The first time you access new material in Unreal, this is going to open up and compile the shaders for those materials. Sometimes it proceeds fairly quickly, and sometimes it takes quite a long time. If you've downloaded some content from the marketplace and it is very extensive, you may see thousands of shaders getting compiled, and it can take some time. Fortunately, you can continue to work while the shaders are being compiled. The mannequin folder has the animations for the third-person blueprint, and the geometry again has some geometry that you can use in your level, and we'll get into that stuff later as well. So I'm just going to close that all up for now. The next area that we'll look at is the modes panel, and the modes panel has subpanels. The subpanel that's selected by default is the place panel, and that has several options in it to select different things that you can place in your level, and we'll look at this content later as well. Next over is the paint level. the landscape editor, foliage, and then the geometry editing for the things that you place in your level. And again, we'll cover those later as well. The tools across the top are fairly self-explanatory. Save the current level that you're on. Use source control. We have an enabled source control. Open the content browser. Open the marketplace. Different settings that are available. Again, we'll get into these later. And blueprints to open the level blueprint or open specific blueprint classes that are in your content. We're not going to get too far into that in this video. The build options, I'm sorry, we skipped over cinematics. That's when you add cinematics like matinees, which are legacy or older ways of doing cinematics. Level sequences is the new way to do it, and that's where you access those objects here. The build menu is important in that we're going to build the lighting for the scene after we move things around. You want to keep your lighting quality at preview when you're working on your level initially, and then when you're ready to release your game, you'll raise that up to production and rebuild your lighting then so that you'll have production quality lighting. It takes quite a bit longer to build production quality lighting. The launch menu allows you to select sorry, I skipped over play. The play menu allows you to select where your game is played. This would play the game in the selected viewport that we're currently working on. Mobile preview, new editor window, which is the one I like to use, and I'll show you how to use that at the end of this video, or to recompile everything, make a standalone game, or to start simulating the game. So we're going to use the new editor window option, and I might as well show it to you since we're here. So when it comes time to play the game for the first time, you click that drop down and select new editor window, play in editor, and that will open up a new window for you to play your game in, and you can run around your level and try out your game. You press the escape key to close that. Since we've now launched using that mode, we don't have to drop that down again. We could just click the play button again, and we're automatically in that play in editor mode, and we could practice or try out the changes that we make to our game. So navigating around, we get to the world outliner, which contains all of the objects that are found in the level that you happen to be editing. And you can select from here by double clicking on them, and it will snap to that particular object. So if you find yourself far away and you need to get to something, you can double click on it here in the world outliner, and Unreal, the editor, will snap you right to that location. You can rename items here, and it's a good idea to rename things as you add them. For instance, you could see this is wall number 7. If you right click on that, you can browse to it, you can edit it, and let's see, when we come down to the edit menu, you can find the rename option, the edit sub menu. F2 is the hotkey for that. And as we proceed through, I'll call out the hotkeys for different items because it's much faster to use them than to fish through all of these menus to find the thing that you're looking for. So that was done by right-clicking on an object in the world outliner. Over on the right side below the world outliner are the world settings, and for the most part in this instruction we won't be messing around with this much until we get to the part where we're going to package up a game for release. The window that we do want to pay attention to are the details. By left clicking on different objects in the scene, or by using the world outliner, the item that you select is displayed here in the detail panel. So I've just clicked on the ramp static mesh, and all of its properties are shown here. So that's the transform for it, the location for it in the world, its rotation, its scale. We can edit these directly. So for example, If I want to scale this in the x-axis, I can change that from 1.0 to 2.0, and that will make it larger in the x-axis. I'm going to put it back to 1. Actually, you can reset that to its defaults by clicking the little yellow arrow just to the right of that. Additional properties that are shown here are the actual static mesh that's assigned to that static mesh, the material that's assigned to it, any physics that are applied, and we'll get into that later, collisions, lighting, rendering, so on and so forth. So all the properties for the object that you select, and this is context sensitive. I'm going to come over here and select the third person character, and you'll see that I now have the properties for the third person character. So next thing I'd like to cover is moving around the scene, and I kind of did that already and didn't mention how that happened. So you put the mouse in the scene or level window, and there's several ways to move around. I like to use the right mouse button and hold the right mouse button down. So you right click, hold the right mouse button down, and move the mouse around, and you will just kind of move the camera and change where you're looking at. If you put your left hand on the WASD keys and press them with the right mouse button held down, you can move around as if you were actually playing a video game and flying around. So W moves forward, S back, A to the left, and D to the right. Additional keys that work while the right mouse button is being held down are the Q key, which brings you down, and the E key, which raises you up. And I would recommend that you pause the video, spend a couple of minutes flying around to get a feel for how that works. Also try left clicking on different objects just to see how they're selected and how the details panel shows the properties of the particular object. And you can practice moving around an object, zooming into one, zooming out, going up and going down. So again, I recommend pausing the video and getting a feel for that. Let's look at how to move things, because that's a really critical aspect of level design. The third person template includes a number of items that are brought in when you create a third person template level. So let's move the stairs by left clicking on them, and observe that there is a 3D widget that appears at the point of origin for the stairs. The widget has a red arrow, a green arrow, and a blue arrow, which correspond to the X, Y, and Z axis. The red or X axis arrow, when clicked and held down with the left mouse button, will move that object along the X axis. In a similar fashion, the green or Y axis arrow will move along the Y axis. You'll notice that there are some bars joining two of the axes together. So if you want to move along the X and the Y at the same time, you can put your mouse over the bar that joins the two. It's green and red, and if you click that, you can move just along the X and the Y axis. The Z axis for going up and down works the same way. Click and drag and move it up and down. And if you grab the center or point of origin of the object, you can move in the X, Y, and Z axis all at the same time. One more key press you can do while you're moving an object is to hold down the Shift key, and that moves the object and the camera as you look at it. So the Shift key and moving along one of the axes will move the object and the camera so that you don't have to keep repositioning it. Now, one thing that happens when you move things on the Z-axis is you might have some difficulty snapping this back down directly on the floor. If an object is above the ground or above another solid object, you can press the End key on your keyboard and it will snap the object down to the floor so that it sits directly on the floor. Notice that when we move the stairs, which is a static mesh, that it left behind the shadow on the level and it doesn't seem to be updating it. The reason for that is static meshes, since they don't move, and since they don't move, their shadows are pre-calculated. Because of this, you have to rebuild the lighting. Notice this says lighting needs to be rebuilt to unbuilt objects when you move a static mesh. So if we were to left click on this static mesh and move that, you'll see that that would also leave behind a shadow. And this reflects that there are now 3 unbuilt objects. So to rebuild the lighting, you would come up here to the Build menu, click the drop down, and select Build Lighting Only. Unreal Engine will gather information about the scene and then build the lighting. This may take some time depending on how complex your level is. This level is not very complex, so you'll see that it proceeds fairly quickly. And we'll just let that finish up without pausing the video. It will invalidate the lighting and then redisplay the window with the correct lighting. There we go. So now the lighting's been corrected and that warning showing that we had unbuilt lighting has gone away. So in addition to moving things around, you can scale them or change the size of them and rotate them. So let's look at this mesh right here, this cube mesh. To change the mode that you are in, you use the space bar, and the space bar toggles the widget on the selected object. So I just tapped the space bar once and I've now changed this to a rotation widget. And this rotation widget works the same way as the movement widget in that the red rotates around the x-axis. I'll rotate that 90 degrees. The green around the y-axis. And the z around the z-axis. Now notice when I did the z, I'll zoom in here so we can see it better, it has the shadow still left from the last time the shadows were calculated. So we'll have to rebuild our lighting for that. In addition to rotation, if you tap your spacebar one more time, you'll switch to the scale widget. Now, since I rotated this, my axes are kind of off because these are local axes. So now this is my Y direction, and I just left click to scale in that direction. This is my X, and this would be the Z. And again, this has the pieces hooked together right here. So if you left click in there, you will lock to the X and the Y axis, and this would be the X and the Z. So as you scale this, you can observe that the scale changes here in the properties. And again, you can edit these directly if you like, just by typing in numbers, or you can use the mouse to do that. And there are adjustments so that you can adjust the granularity or snapping that occurs on this, on the scaling and movement. So again, that would be the space bar to change the widget to the mode that you want, and then you use the widget directly by left clicking on the direction or axis that you want to move to. And it takes some practice to get around. I recommend that you always keep one hand on your keyboard, your left hand on your keyboard, your right hand on the mouse for the most part, and that would be the best way to use this editor. Just trying to use the mouse alone would probably be tricky. I'm sure it's doable, but I think it would be tricky. So we've learned how to move things and scale things, let's look at how we can bring in more content or create some more things for us to interact with in our level. First and foremost is one of the most handy ways of creating content, and that is to duplicate an existing object. So for example, I'm going to turn this so it's oriented correctly. Let's bring that all the way around to 180 degrees. There we go. And then use the shortcut to duplicate things. So let's say I want to set a series of these blocks along here on the ground. If you hold down the Alt key and left click on one of the axis arrows, it will make a duplicate of the object that you had selected. You have to release the Alt key to do it again, and then press it one more time, or again, to duplicate that object. Release, left click. Another thing you can do is hold down the Alt key and the Shift key, and that will duplicate and move the camera along, which is very handy if you want to make multiple objects and position them at the same time across a large area. Just like you can move objects, you can move the third-person character. So I'm going to move the character over a little bit and click play, and right away we see that we have our new level that we just created, or the new content in the level, in addition to having some shadowed area that we need to have rebuilt. Let's find some additional content and put that in our level. So over in the starter content folder, if you click on that, you can go down to the shapes and find numerous shapes to add in. Architecture has things to add in as well. And I think in third person there's a meshes folder, has the original meshes that we had, and up here in the geometry there's a meshes folder as well. So there's a bit of content or things that you can find to add in. The props folder has several some cool stuff to play around with. For instance, the static mesh material preview mesh is used commonly to preview materials, and to add them in you just left click on them in the content browser and drag it in and drop it into your level. So for instance, if I want to add a chair, I could just drag the chair in, a bush, and feel free to add in all kinds of stuff and experiment with it and see what it looks like. I'll just add a few more things in here to interact with. Here's a nice rock. When you've downloaded content from the marketplace, it's often more complex than what you get with the sample content that comes with Unreal, and the first time you left click and drag it in, it may take some time for the object to get loaded. So don't be alarmed if that does in fact happen. If you drag something in and it feels like the engine is locked up, it hasn't. It's just loading this material, calculating the textures and what have you. So add in some content and then rebuild your lighting with the build lighting only option. I think this is actually taking a little bit more time because we've got some additional things added. I'm also going to jump ahead a little bit and show you how to add in some materials so you can see the effect of that, and also kind of add some color to your level. And then there is one last thing I actually want to talk about that we should have hit on, in addition to moving, rotating, and scaling, is deleting objects. So we'll get there in just a second. Let this finish up. So our lighting build's been completed, and let it finish. I'll know it's finished when it clears up this shadowed area over here. So I'm going to go over here to the materials folder, and there are several materials that are included. You can add a material to an object by left clicking on the material and dragging it and dropping it on an object, and it will use that material on the object. And feel free to add these to any of your objects that you've added and just get a look at how they work. This is ground moss. That doesn't really look that good, but probably looks better if you have an actual landscape. And what else do we have here? There's some wood. I like that. And let's see, pine. Nice. So I'm going to add these in and just see what they look like when we play the game. You'll be pretty impressed, I think, with the quality of the materials and how they look in game in real time. So I'll play that and see what it looks like. That looks pretty cool. Okay, so last thing I want to cover is how to delete something, and that's fairly straightforward. This third-person text that was brought in when we made or brought in the template initially doesn't really serve any purpose other than to show us that we used the third-person template. So if we select that with the left mouse button and press the delete key on the keyboard, it will remove it. This spinning question mark is called a documentation actor, and the properties for that, if we pop open the help documentation section, shows us what URL that will go to if we press this open help URL button. That just takes us to a list of videos from Epic about the Unreal Engine. Again, it's probably not something we really need in the level. I'm going to hit the delete key and take that out of there. Now, the delete key works with any kind of content. For example, if I want to take this wall out, I can select it and press the delete key. And I can do that with all of the walls if I wanted to. And further expand out this play area. The volumes that you see around the level we'll cover in a later video, but for now we have covered quite a bit. We've introduced the project launcher, looked at the various templates. We created a third-person game. We walked around the editor a bit, and we learned how to move things, how to scale things, how to rotate things, how to build lighting, and of course how to play the game that we're creating interactively. One important step that's worth mentioning before you exit the Unreal Editor is to save all of your work, and you do that by going to the File menu and selecting the Save All option, and that's the Control-Shift-S is the hotkey for that, and make sure you save your work. So that about wraps up this video. Have some fun playing around with Unreal Engine. Feel free to add things to your level. You can try making an obstacle course. That's always a challenge. And add some materials and play around with the materials to see how they look. And don't forget to spend some time playing and trying out any changes that you make and seeing what they look like in game. So that covers it. Thanks for watching.